Hello readers, I'm the Avid Reader and today we're reviewing In the Presence of Mine Enemies, written by Harry Turtledove in 2003. So this is Harry Turtledove's take on the Nazis winning World War II. And of all the novels of the Nazis winning World War II, and I've read several of them, this is my favorite. So it's quite a radical scenario. The USA has been conquered in World War III. Britain has been conquered in World War II. Germany dominates as a superpower in Europe. There is no Soviet Union really, I believe. And the Germans have been ruling the world basically for half a century. And there are some other powers. You have Italy, you have Japan. Germany is the true superpower here. And as this is the Nazis who have dominated the world, it's actually worse than the Soviets being a secondary superpower. Because here in this book it is mentioned that most of the Slavs have been killed in Eastern Europe. They've been worked to death. So people like Serbs, Poles, Russians. And there's been a genocide against the blacks in Africa and in the United States. And of course the Jews have basically been wiped out from the earth with a few exceptions. And this novel is an analog to the late Soviet Union. So you have characters in this book that are an analog to Brezhnev, I'd say, Khrushchev, Gorbachev, Yeltsin. You also have historical characters that are hinted at in this book, such as Václav Havel. And this novel takes place between 2010 and 2011. The point of view characters you follow with this book are all closeted Jews. So you do have some Jews who remain in the Germanic Reich, but they all pretend to be German Aryans. And you follow 6 of these characters. When this novel starts, the ruler of Germany is Kurt Haldwein. Maybe he's an analog to Brezhnev, so he's not as harsh as the previous German rulers like Hitler and Himmler. He's been ruling since the 80s, but he's a very old ruler as Brezhnev, Chernenko and Andropov were in the Soviet Union. And in World War II, in this scenario, the United States remained neutral, and then a generation later in the 60s, Germany conquered the United States. And the main character, I would say, in this book is Heinrich Gimpel. He's a civilian bureaucrat working at Army headquarters in Berlin, the Wehrmacht. And of course, all these characters are secret Jews. You also have his wife Lise. You have their 3 daughters, one of which you get a perspective of. So you have the daughter Alicia. The book opens with her turning 10, and as she turns 10, she gets to learn from other Jews that she's a Jew herself. But she learns this when her sisters cannot hear, as she is the only one who's old enough to learn about this. As she has a couple sisters called Roxanne and Francesca, and they're too young to know that they're Jewish themselves. So they've been indoctrinated to hate Jews. So throughout this book, you can see this culture where people really despise Jews. They view them as monsters, as disgusting rats, as vermin. When you read this book, you see how horrible the Nazis are. And you also have the character of Susanna West, who's a medieval English scholar at the German university. She's also single and Jewish, and she goes to a medieval conference in London. And here you have the British Union of Fascists, who have been collaborating with the German authorities who are occupying the country, who are demanding autonomy, and they keep talking about the first edition of Mein Kampf. So there have been several editions of Mein Kampf, and apparently there's a small element in Mein Kampf where you could make the argument that the Führer supports democracy. And the British Union of Fascists are agitating for that. And Susanna West hangs out with a few British fascists while she's in London. You also have Esther Strutzman, who's a receptionist at the pediatrician's office, and while she works there, one secretly Jewish family, they come in with a kid who has Tay-Sachs disease, which is disproportionately common among Jews. So you have a subplot in this book, oh, they're thinking of, is this child a Jew, maybe? You have the husband of Esther, Walter Strutzman, who's a computer guy who has to hack into the system and change genealogy records to get this dropped. This case gets dropped only because it turns out that the head of the SS, Lothar Prutzmann, has a niece who has a kid with the same disease. So this is an important irony in this book, that the head of the SS possibly has some Jewish blood, and that becomes important later in the novel. And those are the characters. And Kurt Haldwein, since he's very old, he dies eventually, and he's replaced by the much younger Heinz Buchliger, and he's a mix maybe of Khrushchev and Gorbachev, you can say. And he announces a program of revitalization, so a little bit like Glasnost or Perestroika, where he's going to kind of open up Germany. So he's going to allow for more personal freedom. He's going to admit some of Germany's previous mistakes. And you have some protests in response to this, initially by Dutch and Danish people who get arrested, but then you have the Czech people who organize a peaceful protest, and the police just stood by and watched. And the Americans, of course, they're supposed to pay tribute to Germany. Germany has been running their country from tribute from their occupied zones. They are trying to pay less and less, and Buchliger is kind of tolerating that. You have two factions forming in the Germanic Empire in response to this. So you have the Berlin Gauleiter, Rolf Stolle, who supports the reform of Heinz Buchliger, but wants it to go faster. And then you have the SS head Lothar Prutzmann, who opposes all this reform. He's a hardline totalitarian German Nazi, and of course he's head of the SS, and you can see the SS, how horrible they are in this book. There's a subplot in this book where Heinrich Gimpel and his wife are playing cards with the Dorsches, Willy and Erika. And the scenes where they play cards, when they play cards itself, I find that boring. But the social dynamics between these two couples are interesting, since Erika and Willy hate each other. Willy's going behind his wife back to cheat with his secretary. Erika wants to screw Heinrich, but Heinrich doesn't want to. And because Heinrich rejects her, Erika goes to the SS and accuses him of being a Jew. So of course he's arrested by the secret police, thrown in prison, and he's beaten up a bit. And his daughters are also arrested and put in some juvenile thing. By the way, you get the students' experience of living in the Third Reich in this book, so you get to see the eyes of the daughters. So you get to witness a teacher who's pro-Nazi, a teacher who's tentatively pro-reform. You get to see cruel teachers and good teachers in this book. Anyways, he actually gets himself a lawyer, oddly enough. There are lawyers in this book who specialized in alleged Jew cases, and Heinrich is a bit beaten up, but eventually gets released. You have an SS officer who comes along and releases him, and he winks and hints at it that this SS officer is a Jew himself. You have Jews throughout the Reich, in the army, in the bureaucracy, and even a few in the SS, and they're all secret Jews, and they all kind of try to help each other. And Erika, when she learns that the daughters were arrested, she tried to kill herself but failed, and the daughters are released themselves. But of course, Lisa hates Erika now. First of all, for making a move on her husband. Second of all, almost getting her family killed. You have Heinz Buchliger, who announces elections in the middle of 2011, and when he goes on a vacation in Croatia, the SS attempt to do a coup. So they put in a figurehead of Odilo Globoshnik. It's not the historical one, but he's the so-called new active Führer. The real power is Lothar Prutzmann, the Reichsführer SS. But you have the army guys, they say screw that. They decide to send him some soldiers to protect the Berlin news station. So then you have two different channels. You have the official channel, which says the propaganda of the coup. Then you have the channel who favors Berlin and the reform and democracy movement. Here, Rolf Stolle appeals to the people to come to his residence and support reform and protect him, since the SS may be coming to get him. So you have a mass demonstration in front of the residence of the Gauleiter. The SS come in with tanks, they crush a person, but they don't advance anymore, and they don't start shooting at people, as they are kind of nervous. What are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to massacre all these people? Then you have Rolf Stolle, who comes out and makes fun of these tank guys and laughs at them. And you have Walter Strutzmann, who's hacked into the system and put in a rumor that Prutzmann has Jewish blood. Eventually they start chanting at the SS that Prutzmann has Jewish blood, and the Berlin news station is attacked. The official German propaganda guy, he is forced to read a statement to support the new regime, but you can see that he's reluctant in doing it. But eventually you have the larger army who comes behind the SS surrender. The army is there with tanks, and then they stroll up to the residence of the SS, and there they basically tell the SS, lay down your arms, tell us Prutzmann to come out quietly, otherwise we're gonna bomb the hell out of this place. Instead of coming out, Prutzmann shoots himself, so he's dead, and they bring out the body to show the proof. And then the army tanks go to the Führer residence. By the way, during these events you have Heinrich and Wille and Susanna, who are part of the demonstrations. When they get to the residence, the SS ask who are protecting the Führer, what do you want? And the army guys basically say, we want the Führer. So the Führer is thrown out. He's a middle-aged drunk, and he's lynched by the crowd. So the coup actually collapsed in this book within a day. It started in the morning and it was over by night. Then you have the Führer, Heinz Buchliger, who returns to the German capital. He's greeted by Rolf Stolle, but it's quite clear that Rolf Stolle is the real power here. So this is similar to when Yeltsin prevented the KGB coup in 1991. So Gorbachev was no longer the real power in the Soviet Union. Yeltsin became it. So now you have Stolle kind of in charge, and he's saying, yeah, we're gonna go on with the elections. And the Reichstag are the one who's going to be really important now, no longer the Führer. And in the elections, you have a strong majority for reform, and the Czechs have held a non-binding referendum with at least 3/4 of people voting for independence, the British Union of Fascists demanding autonomy. But the characters in this book are still secret Jews, and the Germanic Empire still exists at the end of this book. It's more liberal now. It probably would collapse, but the army is not sure about letting it collapse. So it's not as much of a happy ending as the end of the Soviet Union. And still remember, tens of millions of Jews, Slavs and blacks are dead in this novel. But now democracy is returning to Europe, finally. At least for so-called Aryans, so French people and Germans and the English and maybe the Americans and the Scandinavians. And that's the book. So how would I rate In the Presence of Mine Enemies? I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. This is my favorite Germans winning World War II novel so far. It's almost as unrealistic as The Man in the High Castle. Novels like Fatherland and Dominion, they're realistic portrayals of the Germans winning World War II. This isn't really a realistic scenario as the Germans have basically conquered half the world, but the consequences of this are horrible, of course, the massacres of tens of millions of people. So in this novel you can see, yeah, totalitarian Nazis are worse than totalitarian communists, even if both are bad. And it's a great novel, and this novel actually made me laugh several times. There's some dark humor in here. You have an affair subplot that actually is done well, where you have a couple who's cheating on each other, and then you have another couple who's trying to stay out of it but can't really. My only gripe with this book is the card playing scenes. I mean, there are several scenes of several pages where they just play cards, and I don't really play cards, and I don't understand how those games work. So those scenes were kind of confusing and boring. Although I did enjoy the parts where you have the couple sniping at each other and Willie and Erica passively aggressively insulting each other. That was interesting and fun. Overall, this is a great novel. It's quite impressive here that you have a bunch of Jewish characters who are pretending to be German, Aryan guys who are anti-Semitic. And it's an interesting analog to the end of the Soviet Union. So it doesn't follow the exact same events, but they are similar and there are strong parallels, as Turtledove likes to do in some of his alternative history. That's logical since any totalitarian state in the long run has to collapse eventually. I'm not sure if there's ever been a totalitarian state that's lasted for more than 100 years. So although this scenario is not really realistic, how it plays out is. And you can see here the German culture of obedience also. A sad aspect of this book is here that you learn the children barely have any school breaks. They get a break for Easter and Christmas. Otherwise they have to go to school in summer. So yeah, the Nazi system is cruel. And you get to see how bad the SS is, but the army is not as bad. You get to see in this novel how pervasive different Nazi institutions are. So for example, how boys have to go in the Hitler Jugend, and the fact that different countries that are occupied by the Nazis have to pay tribute to them now. So overall, this is a great novel. I really like this one. Out of all Harry Turtledove standalones I've read, this may be my favorite. I prefer this novel to Joe Steele, Guns of the South, and of course Rule Britannia. This is also better than Alpha and Omega. So by far this is my favorite Harry Turtledove standalone novel. He's written better series than this, like the Atlantis series. But if you want to read a Turtledove standalone, this is a great start. And if you want to learn about another good Harry Turtledove novel, then I would recommend you to check out my book review of Alpha and Omega, which is basically alternative history of what if the Christian end of days happened. Anyways, I'm the avid reader and I will see you readers next time.